You're listening to the 1 Minute Writing Tip, a podcast that gives you tips on how to overcome writer's block, overwhelm, and self-doubt, learn how to accomplish your God-given book idea, even if you're a busy mompreneur, confidently publish a bestseller, and use your book as a tool for impact and for purpose. We have a variety of episodes with interviews from best-selling authors in the industry, experts who have tools and tricks to help you succeed, and of course, recommendations from me, your host, Caitlin Silva. You can find even more resources on wewritebooks.com, where you can also take advantage of your complimentary bestseller assessment to get a step-by-step roadmap to accomplish your bestseller and beyond. So let's get into today's episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the 1 Minute Writing Tip podcast. I am so excited for today's guest. I'm talking to Janet Pippin. She is a speaker, author, intuitive transformation coach, and she is a recently best-selling author as well. Her life has been filled with twists and turns as she has confronted narcissism, victim shaming, self-doubt, deep betrayal. Her passion is empowering women to find their worth, let go of emotions that no longer serve them, and find the courage to step into their desirable life, which sounds absolutely amazing. Janet is also one of the authors, as I was mentioning recently, bestseller in the #1 bestseller, Leap of Faith, which is amazing and super exciting. So Janet, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I'm so excited to have you.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So will you share a little bit about your journey and just how you got to where you are today?
Okay. Not talking about writing necessarily, just my life, right? Okay. So I was married for 25 years to a man who I didn't know what was going on. The marriage just wasn't good. And I didn't understand, because we didn't really have mental health, wasn't transparent like it is now, and it wasn't talked about. We didn't have computers back then. So I didn't realize until very, very far into that marriage that he was a narcissist and also had borderline personality disorder. So there was a lot of emotional and mental and even some physical abuse that went on in our home. And I have 8 kids, and it was pretty crazy a lot of the time. And so when I got out of that marriage, I was pretty emotionally beat up. And I now had to support my kids and figure all of that out. And it was quite a journey and twists and turns. I did go back to school and I got a master's degree, and I worked in the public schools as a speech language pathologist for many years. And then I met somebody else, and he had 7 kids. And so we got married. And so that makes, do the math, 15 kids. And they didn't all live with us, but, we had this revolving door, kids coming and going all the time. And they were all close to the same ages, and they were all getting into those ages of getting married and going to college and just working on things in their own life. So we did that. And it was pretty good for a really long time. And then suddenly, the day after my mother's funeral, he tells me that he's been unfaithful with a younger woman at his work. So that, just between the death of my mother and that on top of it, just was so hurtful and so much grief that I really almost didn't survive the night. I just really couldn't get up off the floor. I was sobbing and I was crying, and things just were really rough. So anyway, we tried to work it out for a few more years and just could not piece everything back together. So the story in Leap of Faith comes as I was getting ready to get divorced for the second time, and I was really pretty much a basket case. So the story that I wrote in here is just about how I had nowhere else to go but to God, and to turn my circumstances over to Him and let Him guide me, feeling like I should leave where I was. We were selling the house and to move away, and just the guidance that He gave me to where to go and to find a place to live. And it just, even thinking about it now, it just still is so emotional. But just how good God is, how good He is. Just this morning, I was reading in Philippians, and I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me, and He has done that for me many times. And then finding a place to live, down to verse 19, it says, "But my God shall supply all your need according to His riches and glory by Jesus Christ." And He has everything. And if we just have that faith and trust in Him, He found me a place to live, and it was perfect. It was absolutely the perfect spot, the perfect place. And as you will read in the story, how He made that all come together, because I didn't have the things necessary for the landlord to want to rent that condo to me. And yet the Lord made it happen.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Wow. What a incredible just testimony of how God redeems and how God restores even after some of the most devastating things that people can do to other people, right?
Yeah.
I think so often that people go through suffering, and their kind of instinctual response is to blame God and abandon God and be like, "God, why did you do this to me?" And God is like, "Hold on a second, each person has free will and choice, and can choose to hurt other people." And despite that, I think that one of the most beautiful things about God is that God wants to come in and He wants to mend those broken pieces. And He wants to be that comfort that fills those gaps and those hurts and those holes and all of those things.
Absolutely.
You've experienced that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I think that we as humans tend to want it on our time frame and on right now, and we want Him to take away all these hurts and all these things, but yet it's the journey that gives us the growth that we need. And so He allows the journey to happen and for us to just move through that journey. And I have many times been pretty mad at God. We have had it out a few times, but I always found that I just automatically turned back to Him, because at the bottom line it was my faith that kept me okay. And to just find that solace in walking in nature and His creations, and in listening to what the Spirit was whispering to me and guiding me, or the feelings that I had. And it just really was so salve to my wounded heart that, it was so incredible. It's just been such an incredible journey. And at this point, I can say that I am thankful for the journey. It was hard to get to that point, but I am, just because of who I am now compared to who I was before. Mm-hmm. I'm in such a much better place with myself and with God, and just my ability to help shine my light of, not my light, but His light through me. There's that quote from C.S. Lewis: "Don't shine your light so others can see you. Shine your light so through you they can see Him." And I love that quote. And that's kind of what I have tried to create for myself now.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I feel like there's just so much meat and richness there that it's difficult to really get into with, a limited time, only a few minutes. But will you just share a little bit more about, what really led you to, obviously you went through this transformation, this healing, this walk with the Lord, and just, having to, like you said, hash things out, but then allowing Him to come in and mend those pieces and step into who you are and all those things. So what led you to starting to speak out and, want to work with other women and want to write about that experience and all of that? What kind of led to where you are now with everything?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, writing is kind of cathartic too. Putting it down on paper and really thinking it through and going back and rewriting it's healing. It's part of the healing process. And if you have a situation where you're really trying to work it out, like just sit down and write it. Don't even think about that somebody else is going to read it. Just write it, because it's just helps you to get the framework of what is going on in your head. So that is kind of what led me to do this. I also, I actually have written my whole story, but it's just on my laptop. I have not done anything with it, but it was healing for me to write it. And if anybody thinks they want to write something like a memoir or even a book, I would highly recommend. Oh, can I give a tip right now? I would highly recommend that you kind of make a timeline if you're doing a memoir, so that you can just say this date and then what like the main points are. Because when you get into writing it, it starts getting really muddled as to what happened first and what happened second. Or even if you're writing a story, like this is the intro I want, this is what the meat is, and then this is what the conclusion of this one story is. That's also really helpful, just to have that reference to say, did I really cover that point? Did I really explain how I wanted to explain that?
Yeah, I mean, you said that it was, so basically you're saying that what led you to where you are now, as far as for wanting to speak and wanting to work with other women and wanting to help transform other people's lives, it started out by writing your story and stepping into that healing from just sharing on the page what happened to you, even if nobody else is going to read it.
Yes, that is what it started with. And then people started asking me, when they would hear about my story, they would ask me, what have you done? What medication have you been on? What yoga do you use? Just all whatever kinds of things. And I'm like, I've never been on medication. And so anyway, just that kind of conversation of people are hurting and people have been through some pretty traumatic things out there in the world. And they are looking for ways that they can get closer to God and to heal. And so that's what led me to what I do now, is being a transformation energy coach and just helping people recognize what are you doing in your own life to sabotage your own life, and what fears do you have that are keeping you from moving forward, and trying to reframe those and realize that your fear is either holding on to your past, or it is the what ifs of the future that probably aren't even going to happen. So when you can let those go and actually trust God and put your life in His hands, you can make so much more progress.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that is such a good point, is that sometimes the hardest thing to do is surrender everything, especially when you've been hurt. Because when you've been hurt, your instinct is, I want to control everything so that I don't get hurt again. And instead, it's like that kind of ironic thing about God is that He's completely opposite of of everything in the world. And it kind of in this like really beautiful way. And when you can learn to just let Him be in control and let Him guide all the processes and steps and just surrender to Him, it really is really beautiful. It takes time. It takes a process for sure. So I love what you shared there. So you mentioned that when you're writing a story, it's important to have the timeline and make sure it's more structured so you can come back to it and all those things. So what other tips do you have for aspiring authors, especially ones who maybe know they're going to have a story, but they haven't been able to write it so far for, for those doubts and fears, or for feeling like they get down in the muddled and they don't know how to get clear, what tips would you give them?
I would say just start typing. And I know there are a lot of people that feel like they can speak it, but they can't write it. There's a lot of apps out there that will speak to text, talk to text. So just talk it or record it and then transcribe it. And the other thing is just to start. And I found that it was the hardest thing to get the first couple sentences out, and then you would just start. And then I would be up half the night just writing because it would flow once you get started. So just start and don't worry about grammar or spelling. Just write it, and then have Grammarly. Get your Grammarly going, because that's so awesome to correct all those mistakes of grammar and spelling errors and spacing errors and all those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so funny you said that, because one of my rules with my clients is, write all the content and no editing allowed until you hit the end. And that's one of the hardest things for people to do as a rule of thumb. I mean, I can't tell you how many times that people are like, oh, but I could go back and write this differently or write this better. And I'm like, no, you don't have all the content there quite yet, So it's so funny you said that. I completely agree. So since you mentioned that, obviously you've written this chapter that's part of this, this collection, that's this best-selling book, and then you've written your story, but and that's definitely a huge feat. I think just the fact that you have written it is enormous. It is an act of courage to even put it on the paper, even if you never publish it, right? So are there any other projects that you're working on or that you have upcoming that you would like to share about?
I do have another book. I don't know what it's going to be called for sure, but I've just written a couple of chapters in it with this group of women who are very Christian based. And I wrote about prayer and about forgiveness in this book. So it will be coming out shortly, but I don't know exactly when. So
I understand that for sure. But that sounds like such a beautiful work, kind of like the Leap of Faith book, just something that's really inspirational and really needed. I feel like the more time passes, these types of books are needed even more. And so I love that you're a part of that. That's amazing. I can't wait to hear more about it in the future. So for anyone listening, and they're listening to your story, they're listening to what you've done, they're listening to what you do now, and they're thinking, wow, I would love to get more connected and hear more from Janet and all of those things. How can they connect with you? How can they learn more about you? All the things.
Yes, I would love to hear from everyone and connect with them. My website is desirable-life.com. It's pretty simple. You can even put my name in .com and it will also take you to my website. And then you can email me at janet@desirable-life.com as well. And I would love to answer any questions anybody has, or if there's anything I can do to help them, I would love to. There's also some free things on my website, meditations and some tips about being in toxic relationships. So check it out and download some free things.
So if you want to connect with Janet and you want to learn more about her, I will include all of her details in the description for you guys, so that you guys can have all the links. And Janet, thank you so much again for joining me and for sharing your story. And even if it was just a snippet, like sharing about your writing and just your process and your tips for the listeners, it was so great to have you on.
Thank you, Caitlin. It was great to be here. And thank you again for all the work that you did for the Leap of Faith book. You were amazing.
Oh, thank you so much. So for all my listeners, thank you also for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, do let me know in the comments below, and I will see you guys next time.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the 1 Minute Writing Tip podcast. If you're craving a community of writers and a place where you can have regular accountability and be able to celebrate what you're accomplishing and just have that community support to reach your goals and continue to make that progress, I'd like to invite you to the Writers Club. It's a free Facebook group. You can go to facebook.com/groups/Writers Club membership. And I'd love to have you in there. There's additional training and resources for you as an author, and I can't wait to further connect and celebrate your book. Don't forget to like and comment below the episode, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.